Now I'm gonna spin you off into the story of credit. We live in a pretty credit-based economy. Credit affects almost everything we do. Credit has been with us for a long time. I'm going to roll you all the way back to the Crusades. Interesting thing happened during the Crusades. Europe decided that the common way of thinking in religion in the Middle East wasn't too good, and they had a great excuse to get rid of some of their younger, rambunctious guys to send them down there on a mission to straighten these guys out. And there got to be a lot of commerce going back and forth between Europe and the Middle East. And a lot of money going down for equipment and supplies, and then they take treasure and plunder back up into Europe. And a great industry developed there in robbing these caravans of stuff going back and forth between Europe and the Middle East. And so this organization of elite young aristocrats came about. They decided, you know, hey, well, let's make this organization. It was kind of a quasi-religious organization they called the Templars. Some of you may have heard of them. They got the little white splocks with the red crosses. Sometimes they're heroified, sometimes they're vilified, but they were what they were. But their business plan at that point in time was to make safe passage between Europe and the Middle East. And so they would heavily arm these guys. They were pretty good fighters, and they would escort caravans back and forth to guard that treasure. They did real well with that, and then they decided, well, there's a better way. You know, we've got enough money of our own here. Why don't we just take deposits in Europe, give a letter of credit. They don't need this whole caravan to guard on the way down. They can take this letter of credit, take it down to the Middle East, and then exchange that for cash. And worked real well. So they were doing that back and forth from the Middle East to Europe. They got to be pretty wealthy, and at some point in time they figured out, gee, you know, these letters of credit don't necessarily have to travel. You know, we're holding them for 2-3 months. Maybe we can just do a letter of credit in Europe to somebody, and they can reimburse us with our little fee at the end of a period of months. Poof, credit was born. And they became very wealthy doing that. They became so wealthy that some of their clients were like the King of France, the Pope. They loved credit. I've never seen anybody that loves credit like that. King of France had a bit of a shopping problem. Next thing you know, his debt service was more than his income. Created a real problem for the kingdom. The Pope didn't do much better. They were real into lavish lifestyles in that period, and they ended up very heavily indebted to the Templars also. Problem. Okay? Upside down. So they got together and they think, well, you know, what do we do about this? We need to find a solution to this problem. And so Pope says, well, I got a great idea. You know, we can just brand them as heretics and call them unreligious. And we can get together. I've got a little army. King of France has got an army. Let's just gather them up, kill them, and chase them out of town. I thought, well, that's a great idea. Then we won't have to pay them back, right? And then they decided, well, it's not going to be so easy. You know, these guys are pretty elite fighters. They've got a strong fighting force, and you know, so maybe we better surprise them. And so they organized this day. They did it on a Friday. Happened to be the 13th of the month. We know that to this day is Friday the 13th. They rounded up all those guys. They killed most of them, ran the rest of them out of the country. First debt problem was solved. Church at that point in time claimed charging interest was usury. It was not a Christian thing to do to charge interest anymore. And that lasted for quite a while. So we'll roll forward a few centuries, and then we'll go back up to Europe. We've got another group that became pretty successful lending money. They didn't have the same religious restrictions. So they could charge interest. Once again, became pretty popular. People liked interest. Some people became very heavily indebted to this group. And wasn't so happy. Once again, some people got into the situation where the debt service became burdensome. This group became very unpopular. There was a very astute young politician who decided, hey, that's a really good idea. You know, maybe we should rally against this group of people, and I can be really popular. And so he started this party called the Nazi Party. Adolf was his name. And that story didn't end so well either. They didn't fare so well with that, but that was the second big credit eruption in our history. Roll forward to today, now credit is becoming very predominant. Obviously we don't have religious restrictions against lending, and we have interest again. So corporations and the lenders are becoming very strong, very powerful. We see sentiment both ways against that, but that's the world we live in. So there's credit.